Depending on the amount of players, randomly select the number of cards that will be used for the game. Randomly select 6 scoring tiles and place them on the board as indicated on the space. The last scoring tile, when placed on the board, should also have the right side covered with the end game scoring marker. You will then take an X marker and place it next to each one of the 6 power actions that you could possibly take on the bottom of the board. Once each player has selected the race that they wish to be, they should then start to set up their player board. At the bottom here, we will place all of our dwellings as such. Then, you should place all your trade houses, your stronghold, your sanctuary, and your temples. Next, take one marker and you're going to place it on the 0 on your sailing, placing the other marker here for 0 on shoveling. Each race will start with exactly 12 power. Depending upon which race you select will determine how that power is distributed at the beginning of the game. In this instance, the witches will start with 5 power in bowl 1 and 7 power in bowl 2. 4 of your other markers would be placed on the cold track. As such, place them on the 0 and advance according to what it shows on the upper right hand corner of your player board. Your last marker will be placed on the 20-point victory mark on the edge of the score track. Each player then would collect the number of workers, the amount of coins, and also advance on the cold track as listed in the upper right hand corner of their player board. Take your 7 priests and your 3 bridges and place them aside of your player board. Locate the 10 town bonus tiles and place them to the side of the board. Locate all the favor tiles and place them in stacks to the side of the board. Take the remaining coins, workers, and terrain tiles and place them to the side of the board. This tray is not included in the game. The example here is shown between a 2-player match. The board and the playing area should resemble something like this before you begin play. Determine a starting player and take the first player marker and give it to that person. Next, each person should gather 2 of their dwellings and each person will place both of their dwellings onto the board by placing 1, then going counterclockwise around the board, the last person placing 2 and then going counterclockwise until it reaches the first player again. The nomads have a special ability that allows them to start with 3 dwellings instead of only 2. Now that all the starting dwellings have been placed onto the board, each player now will select a card, and this will be a bonus for them for the entire first round. The starting player would first select their card, then the next person, and counterclockwise, would select theirs. The remaining cards would have 1 coin placed on them to hopefully entice you to take them in the next coming rounds. Now we are ready to begin round 1. The first thing that you would do is go ahead and gather up the resources shown on your board. For each dwelling that has been placed onto the board, plus you always gather 1 extra, you will gain 1 worker from the supply and add them to your supply. Trade houses, when built, will allow you to gain power and money. Strongholds, depending on which race you are, will give you several benefits. Temples will give you priests, along with sanctuaries. You should also make sure that you use the benefit that your card gave you. Whenever you see a hand, that means that that is something that you'll do at the beginning of your turn. So in this case, this is symbolizing that we gain 3 power. Down here symbolizes that you would gain 1 on your shipping, giving yourself 2 victory points at the start of the game. Next player would do the exact same thing, collecting all their resources at the beginning of the round. He collects 4 workers, and then also following what it says on his card, he gains 3 power, and here says that he gains an additional 1 worker. There are 8 possible actions you can take on a turn, the first being transform and build, and that'll be the first we're going to cover. Let's use the witch's board as an example. At the very top of the guide here, it shows that the witch's home territory is forest, Every other territory is separated by a shovel. What that means is that witches can build their own dwellings on forest spaces on the board. However, for them to be able to build other dwellings, they must transform that type of territory into forest. The shovels indicate how much digging would be required to be able to transform that type of terrain into their home terrain. The guide over here to the side tells you how many workers it takes per dig. At the start of the game, everybody except one, the giants, always take 3 workers for 1 spade, as indicated by the 3 here and where your track is. What that means is that for every spade separating these territories, it would require 3 workers to try to transform that territory into the forest territory. Let's do an example and show you on the board. The witches want to dig and transform these mountains into the forest regions. Their board shows that it takes 1 shovel to be able to do that. The guide here shows that it requires 3 workers per shovel. So the witches would have to spend 3 workers to transform that mountain region into the forest. As such, now that it has been transformed, they are also allowed to build a dwelling. To be able to build a dwelling, we just look to the left side of where the dwellings are placed on our player board. If you notice here, it shows 1 worker and 2 coins. And it's always important to check with your player board because it will vary depending upon the race. So, in the case of the witches, as long as we spend 1 worker and 2 coins, we can then take a dwelling and place it onto the board, onto the space we just terraformed. You would then be able to place the dwelling onto the space that has been transformed. We would then check the scoring tile for the current round to see if we scored any points. In this case, it does say that at each time that you place a dwelling, you will gain 2 victory points. So in this case, the witches have gained 2 victory points for building a dwelling. So they would be allowed to advance their marker on the score track 2 spaces. Another action that you'd be allowed to take is upgrading your sailing. To upgrade your sailing, you would check to the left of the sailing chart and pay the required resources. So, in the case of the nomads, they would have to have 1 priest and 4 coins to be able to advance on their sailing. If they did have the required resources, simply move up the sailing and gain whatever victory points as stated. In this case, they would gain 2 victory points. However far you are advanced on the shipping track means how many water spaces you'd be allowed to cross to be able to transform and build across water spaces. So in this example, the yellow player or the nomads advanced to number 1 on their sailing chart, which now means that they can cross 1 water hex and move across to be able to start transforming and building across the water. As such. The next action we'll speak about is lowering the exchange rate for your shoveling. Now, what that means is that as long as you pay whatever is signified underneath this chart here for shoveling, in this case 2 workers, 5 coins, and 1 priest, you will then be allowed to advance up on the shovel track 1 space. Notice then you would also gain whatever victory points are signified here. In this case, the witches would gain 6 victory points, and it would then only cost them 2 workers to be able to transform 1 type of terrain into another. The next action that we'll talk about is upgrading a structure. To be able to upgrade a structure, you simply pick the structure that you wish to. In this case, we're going to upgrade this yellow dwelling of the nomads to a trade house. To be able to do that, we look at the player board and see what the dwelling could be upgraded to. To be able to upgrade a building, simply follow the arrows that are located here. They will be the exact color of your player board. In this case, the yellow for the nomads. So what it shows here is that a dwelling can be upgraded to a trade house to a stronghold, or to a temple, and a temple to a sanctuary. What we are going to do then is we're going to remove our dwelling and we're going to upgrade it to a trade house. To be able to do that, we do the exact same thing that we did when we built the dwelling. Remember when we looked to the left here of the board, it showed us our cost. Same goes with the trade house. But notice that in the coin it shows two different amounts. The reason for that is because it depends upon if you are building this trade house next to an opponent's structure or if you are building it all by itself. In the example we're showing, we are building it next to an opponent's structure, so therefore we would pay the 2 workers and the 3 coins listed. Remove our trade house, remove the dwelling, and place the trade house. Now, there is a chance that the green player would be able to gain power based upon this move. However, we're not going to talk about that yet. We'll cover power here in just a bit. Then place the dwelling back onto our board to the furthest right space that is open. The next action we're going to talk about is placing a priest in the cult track. To be able to do that, you simply take a priest that you had already gained from the round, and you're going to place them in one of the 4 cults. We have fire, water, earth, and air. And we also have 4 circles down at the bottom of each one of these tracks with 1 3 and 3 2s. Select your priest, place him in one of those circles, and advance up the number. In this case, we advanced up 3 spaces. Now notice that we had a couple of them spaces that have the power actions with numbers in them as well. What that means is dependent upon what the number is right here is how much power you could possibly gain by advancing. In this case, the green player advanced 3 spaces, thus gaining 3 power. This would be your power. To be able to gain the power, you would always move from bowl 1 to bowl 2. Here is bowl 1, here is bowl 2, and here is bowl 3. So to be able to gain that 3 power, you would take the 2 from bowl 1, then you'd be able to take 1 from bowl 2 into bowl 3. We're going to go over power a little bit more in detail later. Now we will cover power actions. Power actions are listed on the bottom of the map, and there are 6 different ones that you can choose from. And as long as you have the required amount of power in bowl 3 on your player board, you'd be able to spend it to be able to perform one of these power actions. The first power action would allow you to build a bridge. In this example, what it is saying is as long as you spend 3 power, you would then be able to place a bridge on a space on the board. Let's take our bridge and let's demonstrate where it would be allowed to be placed. If your seafaring is not high enough to be able to cross water spaces, you can then spend a power action to build a bridge. So the green player has built a bridge that they are now going to place on this spot here so that they'll be able to build from here across the water to this other space. Now they are connected. The next power action would allow you to gain 1 priest for 3 power points and add it to your supply. Spend 4 power actions and gain 2 workers from the bank and add them to your available supply. Or spend 4 power actions to gain 7 coins from the bank and add to your supply. The last 2 are very similar, given that if you spend 4 power action points, you can shovel 1 time, or you could spend 6 and shovel twice. Great way of trying to transform terrain quickly. The next action that you could possibly take on your turn are any of the listed actions on either your player board or possibly cards that you have gained for at the beginning of the round. They are signified by the orange hex. In this case, the witches do have a special ability that they can take advantage of. However, they would have to first build their stronghold to be able to do that. As an action though, once the stronghold is built, they could place an X over that spot, showing that they have taken that action for this round. The 8th and final action that you could possibly take on your turn is pass. To be able to pass, you simply take your card and you turn it in, selecting one of the other 3 remaining cards. After you do so, turn this card face down to show that you are finished for this round. Some of the cards, when you turn them in, have this little symbol here to the side, and what that means is that you will gain victory points based upon, on this card, if you have a sanctuary or a stronghold, you would gain 4 victory points for each. This one, you would gain 1 victory points per each dwelling, and this one, you would gain 2 victory points per trade house you have on the map. Now that each person has passed, we would go into the cleanup phase of the round. The cleanup phase means is that you're going to take the round score marker and you're not going to look to the left anymore, but only to the right, focusing on these dots here and also what you could gain from this round. In this example, if anybody is on the 4th marker or up all the way possibly to the 8th, they would be able to gain 4 power immediately. If we look on our cult track though, neither one of the players are on that spot, so neither player would gain this benefit. However, if they did, they would perform that action immediately. Once we are done, we will turn it upside down, and then we would go into round 2, performing the exact same functions as we did at the beginning of round 1. Now let's talk a little bit about power and how you gain it. Power is gained in multiple ways throughout the game. We showed you an example of how you could possibly gain it at the end of the round bonus. We also talked about how you could gain it by people building buildings or upgrading buildings that are next to a building or dwelling that you have on the board. Well, in the example that we showed, the yellow player had built a trade house next to the green player's dwelling. To the right side of each one of these tracks here, it shows the amount of power that could possibly be gained based upon how many of your buildings surround an opponent's building that he either builds or upgrades. So in that example, the green player had 1 dwelling and would thus be allowed to gain 1 power. It's important to note that power is always gained by taking power from bowl 1 into bowl 2, from bowl 2 into bowl 3. You can never move power from bowl 1 into 3, nor can you move it from bowl 2 into 3 if there is power in bowl 1, with one exception that we'll explain here in just a bit. Now let's say that the green player had more buildings that surrounded that trade house. Let's say, for instance, they also would have had a temple that was placed there. If that was the case, then they could possibly gain 3 power. And this is an all or nothing example here. You can never take less than this. And what I'm talking about is that if the green player decided to take the 3 power, you would then lose victory points minus 1 power. Then you would have to go down 2 spaces on the victory point track. Now let's talk about sacrificing power. Sacrificing power means is that you are going to completely remove one of your power tokens out of the game to move 1 power token into bowl 3. You can do this as many times as you like, but it's important to remember that you will never gain the power that you have destroyed for the rest of the game. You can also spend power to gain priests, workers, and coins. And it's also important to remember that you can also transform a priest into a worker or a worker into a coin at any time on your turn or your opponent's. This does not count as an action. Favor cards are gained by building a temple or a sanctuary, and after you do, you select one of the 12 available favors and add them to your play area. Favors instantly will give you cult track bonus points and also bonuses throughout the rest of the game. Why don't we look at an example here real quick. If you selected this favor tile here, you would be able to advance 1 up on the fire track immediately. Then you would also at the beginning of each round be able to gain 3 additional coins that you could add into your supply. This favor says you'd be able to advance 2 up in the air or the white column of the cult track, and at the beginning of each round you would gain 4 power. Favors are very powerful and come in handy throughout the game. Now let's talk about towns and how do you find one. To found a town, you must have 7 total points of power between 4 or more buildings. In this example here, we see that the green player has a total of 6 power based upon their player board, 1 for each one of the dwellings, and 3 for their stronghold. To be able to get the 7th point of power, they could place right across the river here that's connected by a bridge another dwelling, and that would give them their 7th point. Now, it is very important to note that unless that bridge was there, they would not be adjacent. Thus, they could not found a town. Another example would be the yellow player, the Nomads, has 3 points of power for their stronghold, 2 for their trade house, and 1 for their dwelling. That gives them a total of 6. By building another dwelling, they would then be able to found a town and be able to select one of the town favors as well. Why don't we look over at the town favors and see what they give you? There are a total of 5 different town favor tiles to choose from. 2 of each of them giving you a total of 10, and you are allowed to choose the exact same one twice if you wish. Each one of the town tiles will give you something different and an amount of victory points listed at the top of them as well. Once you have selected the one you want, place it underneath one of the buildings of your town, showing that that town has been founded as such. Now let's talk about the in-game bonuses. At the end of the game, once all players have passed in the 6th and final round, each player then would be subject to bonuses. In this instance at the top here, what this signifies is that whoever has the most connected buildings would gain an additional 18 victory points, the second player 12, and the third player 6. When considering the adjacency bonus, you would also consider their shipping. In the case of the Nomads here, the yellow player, as long as he had 2 on his shipping track, he would then actually be indirectly connected to all of his buildings all around the map. Thus, he would win majority and gain the 18 victory points. The next bonuses that you could receive are based upon the cult track and where you are positioned. Whoever is the highest on each of the 4 would receive 8 victory points, the second player 4, and the third player 2. It's important to note that if you never advance off of the 0 mark of the cult track, you will never gain any victory points. For every 3 coins that you have, you would gain 1 victory point. In this case, if the witches had 6 coins left over, they would gain 2 additional victory points. Whoever scores the most victory points wins the game. In the case of a tie, both players win.